Jalen Carter slumped in a dank jail cell, his face bruised, blood trickling from a split lip, all because a flight attendant pegged him as dangerous on a red-eye flight from Atlanta to Seattle. The plane stayed grounded, but his life crashed, hard, arrested in a flash, his tech mogul dreams dangling by a thread. Cops chuckled, whispering he'd never prove it as they locked the bars. What began as a simple trip morphed into a brutal ordeal, his future scarred. Who was he really? Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. If you stand for justice against all odds, smash that like, subscribe, and join us for more epic tales of fighting the fight. Jalen Carter stepped onto the dimly lit cabin of the red-eye flight from Atlanta to Seattle, his polished leather shoes tapping softly against the narrow aisle. At 32, he carried himself with a quiet swagger, his tailored blazer hugging, his broad shoulders, a stark contrast to the rumpled travelers shuffling around him. In his left hand, he gripped a sleek laptop bag stuffed with notes for his biggest pitch yet, a revolutionary app called Nexus that could net him millions at the tech conference in Seattle. 4 days from now, he'd face a room full of investors, his startup's future hanging in the balance. This flight was just a means to an end, a 5-hour hurdle before his life could change forever. He slid into his first-class seat, 2B, and exhaled, letting the hum of the plane's engine settle his nerves. The cabin buzzed with the usual chaos, passengers cramming bags into overhead bins, a baby wailing 3 rows back, an old man grumbling about legroom. Jalen adjusted his tie, smoothed his short-cropped hair, and pulled out his laptop, ready to tweak his presentation one last time. Across the aisle, Sarah Mitchell moved with clipped efficiency, her blonde ponytail bouncing as she checked seat numbers. She'd been a flight attendant for 8 years, her sharp eyes trained to spot anything off, or so she told herself. Tonight, her gaze snagged on Jalen. He sat too still, too composed, his dark skin a quiet anomaly among the pale, harried faces of the usual first-class crowd. She squinted, noting his plain blazer. No flashy watch, no designer luggage, just that beat-up laptop bag. He didn't fit, she decided, her lips pursing into a thin line. She leaned toward her co-worker, a lanky guy named Greg, unloading meal trays in the galley, and muttered under her breath, "That guy in 2B, he doesn't belong here." Greg glanced over, shrugged, and kept stacking trays, but Sarah's suspicion festered. Jalen caught the whisper, his jaw tightening. He'd heard it before, the subtle jab, the assumption he was out of place. He forced his eyes back to his screen, fingers hovering over the keys, willing himself to let it slide. Not tonight, he thought. Not when so much was riding on this trip. Sarah strode over, her heels clicking, a tight smile plastered on her face that stopped short of her hazel eyes. "Sir, can I see your ticket?" she asked, her voice syrupy but edged with something hard. Jalen looked up, meeting her stare, and pulled the boarding pass from his pocket. He handed it over without a word, his expression neutral. She scanned it, her brows knitting as she confirmed it matched his seat. Still, she lingered, her fingers tapping the paper. And again. "Please," she added, her tone sharper now, like she was daring him to push back. Jalen's stomach twisted, but he stayed cool, fishing out his wallet and sliding his driver's license across the tray table. She snatched it up, studying it longer than necessary, her lips twitching as she read his name. Jalen Carter. Georgia. Address. Nothing flashy or suspect. She shoved it back, muttering a curt thank you, and spun on her heel, her ponytail whipping behind her. Jalen watched her go, his pulse ticking up. He knew that look, that pause, the unspoken accusation. He'd seen it in boardrooms, at gas stations, hell, even walking his dog. But he couldn't afford a scene, not now. Sarah reached the galley, her hands trembling slightly as she poured water into a plastic cup. Greg was there, wiping down a counter, and she leaned in close, her voice a harsh whisper. "Did you see the guy in 2B? Something's off." Greg peeked out, his bony frame slouching as he squinted toward first class. Jalen sat there, tapping away at his laptop, his posture straight, unbothered by the pre-flight bustle. "What are you talking about?" Greg said, scratching his stubbled chin. "He seems fine to me. He's got a ticket, doesn't he?" Sarah nodded, but her eyes darted back to Jalen, her mind racing. Yeah, but I don't know. I've got a bad feeling. He's too quiet, too. I don't know. Calm. Greg snorted, turning back to his trays. You're paranoid, Sarah. Relax. She crossed her arms, her nails digging into her elbows. She couldn't explain it, not without sounding crazy, but every fiber of her screamed this guy was trouble. Maybe it was the stories she'd read, the headlines about stowaways or worse. Maybe it was just him, his stillness clashing with the chaos she expected from a real first-class passenger. Jalen felt her eyes boring into him from the galley, a prickling heat crawling up his neck. He glanced at his watch, 10 minutes to takeoff, and tried to focus on his pitch deck. Slide 3, market analysis, 60% growth projected in 2 years. Numbers usually steadied him, but not tonight. He flipped to slide 4, user retention, when Sarah's shadow fell over him again. She didn't speak this time, just stood there, clipboard in hand, watching. He met her gaze, held it for a beat, then went back to his screen. She huffed and moved on, her heels clicking louder now like she was stomping out her frustration. Jalen's fingers paused mid-type. He knew what was coming, had lived it too many times. The stares, the whispers, the inevitable escalation. He'd hoped this flight would be different, just once, but hope was a luxury he couldn't bank on. The cabin doors thudded shut, the overhead lights flickering as the plane prepared to roll. Jalen stowed his laptop, buckling his seatbelt with a soft click. The engines whined, a low rumble vibrating through the floor, and he leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He pictured the conference stage, the spotlight, the applause. 4 days, he told himself. 4 days, and this would all be worth it. But in the galley, Sarah wasn't done. She grabbed the intercom phone, her fingers shaky as she punched in the ground staff code. Greg shot her a look, but she waved him off, her voice low and urgent when the line connected. This is Flight 392, red eye to Seattle. We've got a passenger in first class, seat 2B, who seems suspicious. I need someone to check this out before we depart. She hung up, her chest tight, telling herself it was just protocol, nothing personal. She'd seen the training videos, the ones about gut feelings saving lives. Better safe than sorry, right? Minutes dragged like hours as the plane sat still, the tarmac lights glinting through the windows. Jalen noticed the delay, his brow furrowing. Passengers shifted, grumbling about missed connections, but he stayed quiet, his hands resting on his thighs. Sarah bustled past, avoiding his gaze, her clipboard clutched like a shield. Then the cabin door swung open, and 2 cops stormed in, their boots heavy on the carpeted floor. The taller one, a broad-shouldered guy with a buzz cut, scanned the rows, his hand hovering near his holster. The shorter one, wiry with a patchy beard, followed, his eyes locking on Jalen. "Sir, you in 2B?" the tall one barked, his voice cutting through the murmurs. Jalen nodded, slow and deliberate, his heart thudding. "Yeah, that's me." The cop jerked his chin. "Step out. We need to talk." Jalen unbuckled, standing smoothly despite the adrenaline spiking through him. Passengers gawked, phones slipping out to record, a woman in 3C whispering, "What did he do?" to her husband. Sarah hovered near the galley, her arms crossed, a smug twist to her lips as the cops flanked Jalen. "Hands where we can see 'em," the short one snapped, and Jalen complied, raising them chest high. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice steady, though he knew the answer didn't matter. The tall cop smirked. "Routine check, let's go." They grabbed his arms, one yanking his laptop bag from the seat, and marched him down the aisle. Jalen's jaw clenched as he caught Sarah's eye, her smirk widening. "Better safe than sorry," she said, loud enough for him to hear, her words a dagger in the air. The cabin erupted in hushed chaos as they dragged him off, passengers craning, their necks, some muttering approval, others shaking their heads. A kid in coach tugged his mom's sleeve, asking, "Is he a bad guy?" She shushed him, eyes wide. Jalen's pleas echoed back as the cops hauled him through the jet bridge. "I'm just a passenger. Check my ticket, my ID, anything." His voice was firm, controlled, but it bounced off the walls, ignored. The tall cop tightened his grip, muttering, "Keep moving, pal." Jalen stumbled slightly, his polished shoes scuffing the floor, his mind racing. This wasn't just a mix-up, not with Sarah's smugness, the cop's aggression. It was something uglier, something he'd faced before but never like this, not with so much on the line. They shoved him into the jet bridge, the cold metal walls closing in, and Jalen's breath hitched. 4 days to Seattle, to the pitch, to everything he'd built. Now he was in cuffs, his blazer wrinkled, his laptop bag swinging from a cop's hand. Sarah watched from the doorway, her clipboard tapping her thigh, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. She'd called it, hadn't she? She'd seen something nobody else had. Jalen's last glimpse of her was that smirk, a silent promise of more to come as the cops dragged him into the night, the plane's engines fading behind him. Jalen Carter sat on a cold metal bench in a dimly lit holding room at the Atlanta airport. His wrists chafed raw from the cuffs biting into his skin. The air reeked of stale coffee and sweat, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry bees. His blazer hung crooked on his shoulders, one sleeve torn from the cop's rough handling, and a trickle of blood dried on his knuckles from where he'd scraped them against the jet bridge wall. He kept his head high, eyes locked on the cracked, concrete floor, refusing to let the panic clawing at his chest show. 2 officers loomed across the scratched steel table, their badges glinting under the harsh light. Detective Hargrove, a hulking man with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his barrel chest. Detective Pike, wiry with a patchy beard and twitchy fingers, paced behind him, his boots thudding against the tiles. They'd tossed Jalen's laptop bag onto the table, its zipper half open, paper spilling out like guts from a wound. Hargrove smirked, picking up Jalen's driver's license and flicking it between his thick fingers. "Jalen Carter, huh? Fancy ID for a guy like you. What's a black guy doing in first class? Who'd you steal this from?" His voice dripped with mockery, each word a jab meant to draw blood. Jalen's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone even, measured, like he was pitching to a room of suits. "I'm heading to a tech conference in Seattle. I've got a startup, an app called Nexus. That's my ticket, my seat, my life. Check it." Pike snorted, snatching the boarding pass from the table and crumpling it in his fist. "Tech conference? Sure, pal. More like you're running something shady. First class ain't for your kind." He tossed the crumpled paper back, letting it bounce off Jalen's chest. Jalen's fingers curled into fists, but he unclenched them, resting his hands flat on his thighs. He knew this game, had played it, since he was a kid in Decatur, staring down cops who saw his skin before his story. Hargrove leaned forward, his chair creaking under his weight, and tapped the table with a meaty finger. "Let's cut the crap. What's in the bag? Drugs? Stolen gear? You don't look like no tech hotshot to me." Jalen met his gaze, unflinching. "It's my laptop, my notes, my work. I've got nothing illegal. You've got no reason to hold me." Pike stopped pacing, his lips curling into a sneer as he reached into his pocket. "Oh, we've got reason now," he said, pulling out a small plastic baggie filled with white powder. He dangled it in front of Jalen, then slid it into the laptop bag with a theatrical flourish. "Look what we found. Possession with intent, huh? That's 5 years minimum." Jalen's stomach dropped, his breath catching as the lie sank in. "That's not mine," he said, voice rising despite his effort to stay calm. "You planted that. You know it's fake." Hargrove chuckled, a low guttural sound. "Prove it, genius. Your word against ours. Guess who wins?" The room spun for a moment, Jalen's mind racing. His app, his pitch, his whole damn future, all teetering on the edge because of these 2 clowns and their cheap setup. He forced himself to breathe, to think. He'd built Nexus from nothing, coded it in his tiny apartment, fought off doubters who said a black kid from Georgia couldn't crack tech. He wasn't about to let these badge-wearing thugs rip it away. "Call my assistant," he said, steadying his voice. "She's got my itinerary, my credentials. This is a mistake." Pike laughed, a sharp bark that echoed off the walls. "Assistant? What, you think you're some big shot? Sit tight, hotshot. You're ours now." Hargrove scribbled something on a clipboard, then stood nodding to Pike. "Book him. Possession, resisting. Whatever sticks. Jalen's heart pounded, his vision narrowing as Pike yanked him up by the arm, shoving him toward a holding cell down the hall. Just as the cell door clanged into view, a new voice cut through the haze, crisp and commanding. "Let him go. Now." A woman in a navy suit stormed in, her heels clicking like gunfire, a leather briefcase swinging from her hand. She was short, barely 5 feet, but her presence filled the room. "I'm Denise Brooks, Mr. Carter's attorney. You've got no grounds to hold him. Here's his conference invite, his business license, his damn tax returns if you want them." She slapped a stack of papers on the table, her dark eyes blazing as she stared down Hargrove. "This is harassment, and I've got a call into your captain already." Hargrove's scowl deepened, but he flipped through the documents, his thick fingers smudging the edges. Pike hovered, the baggie still dangling from his hand, his sneer faltering. Denise didn't blink. "That little stunt with the powder? I've got witnesses from the plane who saw you two drag him off. Try explaining that in court." The air thickened, tension coiling like a spring. Hargrove tossed the papers back, grumbling under his breath. "Fine. Cut him loose. But don't think this is over, Carter." Pike unlocked the cuffs, shoving Jalen toward Denise with a muttered curse. Jalen rubbed his wrists, the red welt stinging, and grabbed his bag, relief washing over him like cool water. He dodged the bullet, kept his freedom, his shot at Seattle still alive. Denise guided him out, her voice low. "You're lucky I got here fast. Your assistant freaked when you didn't text." Jalen nodded, his throat tight. "Thanks. I thought I was done." They stepped into the humid Atlanta night, the airport lights glaring in the distance, and Jalen let himself breathe deep, the weight lifting off his chest. He'd won this round, outsmarted the setup, kept his dream intact. But as they reached his car, parked in the overnight lot, a sharp crash shattered the quiet. Glass sprayed across the asphalt, his driver's side window exploding inward. Jalen ducked, heart slamming against his ribs, as Denise yelled, "Get down!" A brick thudded onto the pavement, a crumpled note taped to its side. Jalen snatched it, unfolding it with shaking hands. Scrawled in jagged black ink were 5 words, "Stay in your lane, boy." He whipped around, scanning the shadows, and caught 2 figures leaning against a patrol car 50 yards off. Hargrove and Pike, their silhouettes unmistakable, grinned under the sodium glow of a street lamp, their laughter drifting on the breeze. Jalen's blood ran cold, the victory souring in his gut. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. "Hey, what do you think about Jalen's cool-headed fight against these dirty cops?" Comment number 1 if you're rooting for him to take them down, or number 2 if you think they'll keep coming harder. If you're fired up for justice against this kind of raw prejudice, hit that like button to show some love. And if you want to see Jalen keep battling the odds, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stick with us for every twist ahead. These cops thought they had him pinned, but Jalen's got smarts and a lawyer on speed dial. Did Hargrove and Pike just let him walk too easy? What's their next move after that brick through his window? Drop your guesses below because this ride's about to get wilder. Jalen Carter stood in the fluorescent glow of the Atlanta airport terminal, his blazer still torn, his wrists still stinging from the cuffs that had clamped them hours ago. The night pressed heavy outside, a muggy haze clinging to the glass walls, but he shook it off, his jaw set with a fire that hadn't dimmed. That brick through his car window, the note's jagged threat, "Stay in your lane, boy," still burned in his mind. But he wasn't running. Seattle was 3 days away. His tech conference pitched the lifeline for Nexus, his app, his dream. He'd fought too hard to let Hargrove, Pike, or anyone stop him now. His lawyer, Denise, had patched through to his assistant, booking him on the next red-eye, leaving in 2 hours. Jalen adjusted his laptop bag, its strap digging into his shoulder, and marched to the gate, every step a defiance of the chaos behind him. The terminal buzzed with late-night stragglers, a janitor mopping a soda spill, a couple arguing over a delayed bag. Jalen reached Gate 17, the boarding area for Flight 409, and handed his new ticket to the gate agent, a burly man named Tom with a buzzed head and a jaw like a bulldog's. Tom's eyes flicked over Jalen, lingering on his torn sleeve, his dark skin, then down to the ticket. A glint caught Jalen's eye. A tiny Confederate flag pin on Tom's lapel, gleaming under the high overhead lights. Jalen's stomach tightened, but he kept his face blank, handing over his ID without being asked. Tom grunted, scanning the barcode, his thick fingers tapping the counter. "Back again, huh?" he said, voice low and gravelly, like he was chewing. "Rocks." Jalen nodded, clipped. "Yeah, missed the last one." Tom's lips twitched, not quite a smile, and he waved him through, but his eyes tracked Jalen like a hawk sizing up prey. Jalen stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool metal tunnel echoing his footsteps, and boarded the plane, sliding into seat 4A this time, another first-class spot. The cabin hummed with the same tired energy as before, passengers stowing carry-ons, a businessman snoring already in 5C. Jalen settled in, cracking his knuckles, ready to bury himself in his pitch notes. Then he saw her, Sarah Mitchell, ponytail swinging, clipboard in hand, moving down the aisle like a storm cloud. Her hazel eyes landed on him, and her face drained of color, her mouth dropping open for a split second before snapping shut. Jalen's pulse kicked up, but he held her gaze, daring her to start something. She spun away, disappearing into the galley, her heels clicking double time. In the cramped galley, Sarah grabbed the arm of a new co-worker, a wiry guy named Pete with a patchy goatee. "That's him," she hissed, jabbing a finger toward first class. "The guy from the last flight, they let him go, but he's trouble, I know it." Pete peeked out, scratching his neck. "What's he done?" Sarah's voice dropped, urgent, laced with venom. "Nothing yet, but he's got that vibe. I called security last time and he's back like nothing happened. We can't let him fly." Pete frowned, hesitant, but Sarah was already moving, her clipboard slapping against her thigh as she cornered the lead attendant, a stern woman named Carla. "He's in 4A, Sarah whispered, her words tumbling fast. "He's got a history. I don't trust him." Carla raised an eyebrow, but Sarah pressed. "I'm telling you, he's a risk." Carla sighed, nodding toward the gate. "Fine. I'll tell Tom." Back at the gate, Tom got the call on his radio, Sarah's voice crackling through with lies about past trouble. He lumbered down the jet bridge, his bulk filling the doorway, as he stepped onto the plane. Passengers glanced up, sensing the shift, a ripple of unease spreading. Tom stopped at Jalen's row, his shadow falling over the seat. "You!" he barked, voice like a gunshot. "Out! Now!" Jalen looked up, slow and steady, his laptop open on the tray table. "What's the problem?" he asked, keeping his tone flat. Tom crossed his arms, the flag pin winking in the light. "Problem's you. This is private property. We don't want you here." Jalen's eyes narrowed, but he didn't budge. "I've got a ticket, paid for. I'm not breaking any rules." The cabin went quiet, heads turning, phones slipping out to record. A woman in 3B whispered to her friend, "He's right, isn't he?" Her friend nodded, filming. A guy in coach muttered, "Typical, loud enough to carry." Tom's face reddened, his meaty hands balling into fists. "Don't care. My gate, my call. Get up or I'll drag you out." Jalen leaned back, crossing his arms, his mind racing. He'd studied law in college, knew the loopholes. "Federal aviation rules say you can't deny me without cause. I've got a contract of carriage. You've got nothing but bias." Tom blinked, thrown, his bluff called. Passengers murmured louder, some nodding, others glaring at Jalen like he'd spat in their coffee. Sarah hovered near the galley, her smirk gone, replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. Tom hesitated, his radio crackling with Carla's voice. "Just let him stay, Tom. We're behind schedule." Tom's jaw worked, but he stepped back, muttering, "Watch yourself, pal," before stomping off. Jalen exhaled, a flicker of triumph warming his chest. He'd outsmarted them, kept his seat, kept his shot at Seattle alive. The plane rolled toward the runway, engines roaring, and he opened his laptop again, fingers steady as he typed. He'd won this round, turned their game against them. The takeoff was smooth, the cabin lights dimming as they climbed into the night sky, and Jalen let himself relax, just for a moment, the city lights shrinking below. But 30 minutes in, As the plane leveled off at 35,000 feet, Sarah reappeared. She carried a tray with a single coffee cup, steam curling from the rim, and approached Jalen's seat with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Complimentary drink," she said, her voice syrupy, too sweet. Jalen glanced up, wary, but nodded. "Thanks." She leaned in, casual as anything, and then her hand jerked, the cup tipping. Scalding coffee splashed across his chest, soaking his shirt, searing his skin. He jolted back, gasping as the heat bit deep, blisters blooming under the fabric. "Oops, my bad," Sarah said, her tone mocking, her lips curling into a sneer as she stepped away. Passengers snickered, a guy in 5A chuckling, "Clumsy much?" while a woman in 3C winced, whispering, "That's not right." Jalen gritted his teeth, pain radiating from his chest, his shirt clinging wet and hot. He grabbed napkins from the tray table, dabbing at the mess, his hands shaking with fury. Sarah sauntered back to the galley, her ponytail bouncing, untouchable, in her little kingdom of the sky. His skin throbbed, red and raw beneath the ruined blazer, but he swallowed the rage, forcing himself to breathe. She'd hit back, petty and cruel, proving she wouldn't let his win stand. The coffee stain spread, a dark bloom on his white shirt, and he clenched his fists, staring at the screen in front of him. Nexus glowed there, his app, his fight, still alive despite her. But the burn on his chest pulsed with every heartbeat, a reminder that this flight, this night, was far from over. Sarah's smirk lingered in his mind, a promise of more to come, and Jalen knew the real battle was just heating up. Jalen Carter sat rigid in seat 4A, the hum of the plane's engines a dull roar beneath the throbbing pain in his chest. The coffee Sarah had accidentally spilled on him 30 minutes ago had cooled, leaving his shirt stiff and sticky, the skin underneath raw and blistered. He'd peeled off his ruined blazer, draping it over the armrest, and now hunched over his laptop, trying to focus on his Nexus pitch. The screen glowed with graphs and projections, a lifeline to Seattle, but every breath stung, a reminder of Sarah's smug sneer as she'd walked away. He dabbed at the burns with a damp napkin, the sting sharp, but he gritted his teeth, forcing his mind back to work. 3 days until the conference, 3 days to turn this nightmare into a win. He couldn't let her break him, not now. The cabin lights were dim, most passengers dozing or buried in their screens, the red-eye flight settling into a sluggish quiet. Jalen adjusted his earbuds, letting a low jazz track drown out the murmurs, when a shadow loomed over him. He glanced, up, and his stomach knotted. A burly guy, mid-40s, stood in the aisle, his gut straining against a faded flannel shirt, his face flushed with booze and something uglier. Roy, seat 6C, had been loud during boarding, griping about the meal options, but now his bloodshot eyes locked on Jalen with a predator's gleam. "You," Roy slurred, swaying slightly, his voice cutting through the cabin's hush. "You don't belong up here." Jalen pulled out an earbud, keeping his expression blank. "I've got a ticket. Sit down, man." Roy's lip curled, a snarl forming. "Ticket don't mean shit. First class ain't for you." Jalen's pulse ticked up, but he stayed still, sizing Roy up. 6 feet, maybe 250 pounds, unsteady but mean. He'd seen this before, the drunk guy looking for a fight, but the edge in Roy's voice, the way his fist clenched, screamed something personal. Sarah hovered near the galley, her clipboard tucked under her arm, watching with a flicker of a smirk. She leaned toward Pete, the wiry attendant, whispering something that made him glance over, then look away. Jalen caught it, the setup clicking into place. She'd egged this on, planted the seed. Roy took a step closer, his breath reeking of whiskey, and jabbed a thick finger at Jalen's chest. "Move, boy, or I'll move you." The word hit like a slap, and passengers stirred, heads turning, a few gasps rippling through the rows. Jalen set his laptop aside, slow and deliberate, his voice low. "Back off. I'm not looking for trouble." Roy laughed, a harsh bark, and lunged, shoving Jalen's laptop bag off the seat. It thudded to the floor, papers scattering, and Jalen's restraint snapped. He ducked as Roy swung a meaty fist, the punch grazing his ear, and instinct kicked in. Years of wrestling at Morehouse surged back, muscle memory taking over. He grabbed Roy's arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him into the seat back, pinning him with a knee. Roy grunted, flailing, his bulk no match for Jalen's speed. "Stay down," Jalen hissed, his grip iron tight, sweat beading on his brow. The cabin exploded. A woman in 3B shrieked, clutching her purse, while a guy in 5A cheered, "Get him!" Others yelled slurs, "Let him go, you thug!" Slicing through the air like shrapnel, Sarah bolted from the galley, her heels clacking, and grabbed the intercom phone, her voice shrill. "Captain, we've got a fight in first class. Emergency landing now." Pete scrambled after her, wide-eyed, as the plane lurched slightly, the pilot's voice crackling overhead. "Folks, we're diverting to Nashville. Buckle up." Passengers groaned, some filming, others glaring at Jalen like he'd torched their vacation plans. Roy wheezed under Jalen's hold, his face purple, but Jalen eased off, stepping back, hands raised. "He started it," he said, loud enough for the cameras, but the damage was done. The plane descended fast, the Nashville skyline glinting through the windows, and Jalen sank into his seat, chest heaving. He'd stopped Roy, kept his cool, maybe even won some points with the witnesses filming. His bag lay crumpled on the floor, papers strewn, but he'd held his ground. The landing was rough, wheels screeching on the tarmac, and before the seatbelt sign flicked off, the cabin door banged open. 4 cops stormed in, their boots pounding, badges flashing under the cabin lights. The lead one, a lanky guy with a hooked nose, zeroed in on Jalen. "You, up, hands where I can see 'em." Jalen stood, slow, his burns pulsing with every move. "I was defending myself. Check the videos," he said, nodding at the passengers still recording. The cop ignored him, grabbing his arm, twisting it behind his back. They pinned him face down in the aisle, his cheek grinding into the carpet, the coffee stains on his shirt smearing into the fibers. Roy staggered up, clutching his ribs, and smirked as the cops cuffed Jalen. "He attacked me," Roy lied, his voice a whine now, playing the victim. A woman in 4C muttered, "That's not true," but the cops didn't flinch, yanking Jalen to his feet. "You're under arrest," the lanky one snapped. "Assault, disturbing the peace." Jalen's heart sank, but he kept his voice steady. "Ask them. They saw it." He jerked his head toward the passengers, some nodding, others looking away. The second cop, a squat guy with a buzz cut, scooped up Jalen's bag, tossing it over his shoulder like trash. "Tell it to the judge," he grunted, shoving Jalen toward the door. Passengers whispered as they hauled him off, a mix of shock and venom in the air. "Should have stayed in coach," a guy in 6B muttered, loud enough to sting. A kid in 7D asked his dad, "Why's he in trouble?" The dad shushed him, eyes averted. Jalen stumbled down the jet bridge, the cop's grips bruising his arms, his mind racing. He'd fought off Roy, kept it clean, thought the truth would hold. The Nashville night hit him as they stepped outside, humid and thick, the airport lights glaring. They shoved him into a squad car, the door slamming shut, and Jalen leaned back, catching his breath. He'd survived the ambush, kept his head, maybe even had proof on those phones. Seattle was still in reach, his pitch still alive. But as the car peeled out, Jalen glanced through the window. Roy stood by the terminal entrance, shaking hands with the lanky cop, a wad of crumpled bills slipping into the cop's pocket. Roy's smirk widened, his bloodshot eyes meeting Jalen's through the glass, a promise of more to come. The cop pocketed the cash, clapping Roy on the shoulder, and climbed into the driver's seat, chuckling. "Friends in low places, huh?" he said, starting the engine. Jalen's gut twisted, the victory he'd clung to dissolving like smoke. This wasn't just Sarah or Roy anymore. It was bigger, uglier, a network of hate with cash and badges to back it. His burns throbbed, his wrists ached, and the squad car sped into the night, Nashville's neon glow fading behind him. He'd beaten the drunk, but the real fight was just clawing its way out of the shadows. Jalen Carter slumped against the damp concrete wall of a Nashville precinct cell, the metallic clang of the bars still ringing in his ears. His shirt, stained with coffee and smeared with aisle dirt, clung to his blistered chest. Every breath, a jagged stab of pain. Blood crusted under his nose from the mid-flight scuffle with Roy, and his wrists bore fresh welts from the cuffs that had dragged him here. The cell stank of piss and despair, a flickering bulb overhead casting shadows that danced like ghosts. He wasn't alone. 3 hulking figures lounged across the narrow space, biker types with leather vests and tattooed knuckles, their eyes glinting as they sized him up. Jalen recognized the vibe instantly, the same predatory sneer Roy had worn on the plane. These weren't random drunks. They were waiting for him. The biggest one, a bald brute with a scar slicing his cheek, cracked his knuckles and stood, his boots scuffing the floor. "Well, well," he drawled, voice thick with southern grit. "Look, what the pigs dragged in. Roy's new friend, huh?" Jalen straightened, his pulse hammering, but he kept his face stone cold. "Don't know what you're talking about," he said, low and steady. Scarface grinned, stepping closer, his buddies rising behind him. "Oh, you will. Roy says you need a lesson, boy." The word landed like a punch, and before Jalen could brace, Scarface swung, a meaty fist crashing into his jaw. Pain exploded, white hot, and Jalen staggered, tasting copper as blood filled his mouth. The others closed in, fists flying, boots stomping, slurs spitting from their lips like venom. "Stay down, trash!" one roared, kicking his ribs. "Ain't no place for you here," another snarled, slamming a heel into his thigh. Jalen curled, protecting his head, but he wasn't done. Years of wrestling, years of fighting bigger odds, surged through him. He caught a leg mid-kick, twisted hard, and heard a crack as Scarface's buddy howled, clutching a busted nose. Jalen rolled up, adrenaline drowning the pain, and drove his shoulder into Scarface's gut, slamming him into the bars. The third guy lunged, but Jalen dodged, landing a sharp elbow to his temple. The cell erupted, grunts and curses bouncing off the walls, blood smearing the floor. Jalen fought like a cornered animal, his burns screaming, his ribs aching, but he held his own, dropping 2 of them before the guards finally stormed in. "Enough!" a beefy cop bellowed, swinging a baton that cracked against the concrete. But instead of breaking it up, he aimed a taser at Jalen, the prongs biting into his side. Electricity ripped through him, his muscles seizing, and he collapsed, gasping, face down in the filth. The guards hauled the bikers back, smirking as they left Jalen twitching on the floor. "He started it," Scarface lied, wiping blood from his lip, and the cop nodded, jotting something on a clipboard. "Resisting arrest, huh? Figures." Jalen coughed, his vision swimming, but he forced out words, hoarse and raw. "They jumped me. You saw." The cop just chuckled, locking the cell and walking off, leaving Jalen sprawled alone again. His body screamed, bruises blooming across his ribs, his left eye swelling shut. But his mind clung to one thing: survival. He'd taken their hits, given some back, kept breathing. Seattle was still out there, Nexus still alive in his busted laptop bag, tossed in the corner like trash. He dragged himself to the bench, every move agony, and sat, head in his hands, waiting for the next blow. Hours bled into each other, the cell's damp chill seeping into his bones when the door clanged open again. Denise Brooks stormed in, her navy suit crisp despite the late hour, her briefcase swinging like a weapon. "Jalen!" she snapped, her voice cutting through the haze. "What the hell did they do to you?" He looked up, wincing, and managed a weak nod. "Ambush," he rasped. "Roy's pals." Denise's eyes blazed as she turned on the guard, a squat guy chewing gum like it was a chore. "Open this now. I've got video from the plane, passengers posting online. This is a setup and you're done if you don't let him go." The guard hesitated, gum popping, but Denise shoved her phone in his face, a shaky clip of Roy's. Mid-flight attack playing loud. Assault, corruption, you name it. Your captain's already on the line. The guard grumbled, unlocking the cell, and Jalen staggered out, leaning on Denise as she guided him down the hall. "You're a magnet for trouble," she muttered, but her grip was firm, steadying him. "Social media's blowing up. Those videos saved your ass." Jalen nodded, his throat too dry to speak, relief flooding him like cool rain. He'd survived the beating, outlasted the frame-up, and now he was free again, the precinct's neon exit sign glowing ahead. They stepped into the sticky Nashville night, and Denise hailed a cab to a cheap motel nearby, promising to get him on the next bus to Seattle. Jalen sank into the back seat, his battered body slumping, thinking he'd finally caught a break. The cab dropped him at a rundown joint off the highway, the clerk barely glancing up as he checked in. Room 12, second floor. He limped inside, the room a haze of cigarette smoke and mildew, and locked the door, collapsing onto the lumpy bed. His bag hit the floor, papers spilling, but he didn't care. Sleep tugged at him, a chance to reset, to heal. He'd made it. Through, kept his shot at the conference alive. But just as his eyes drifted shut, a deafening crash shattered the quiet. Glass sprayed across the room, the window exploding inward, and a flaming bottle smashed onto the carpet, fire licking up. The bedspread. Jalen bolted upright, heart slamming, and rolled off the mattress, the heat singeing his arms. Flames roared, smoke choking the air, and he crawled to his bag, snatching it as he stumbled to the door. He yanked it open, coughing, and spotted a singed note taped to the frame. "Next time you burn." Sirens wailed in the distance as he staggered outside, the motel's neon sign flickering against the blaze. Guests spilled from their rooms shouting, but Jalen's eyes locked on two figures across the lot, leaning against a familiar patrol car. Hargrove and Pike, their grins sharp under the firelight, watched the chaos like it was a show. Hargrove tipped his cap, a mock salute, while Pike lit a cigarette, the flame flaring in the dark. Jalen's fists clenched, his burns screaming, the note crumpled in his hand. They'd followed him, tracked him, turned a beating into a death trap. The cab ride, the motel, all a fleeting illusion of safety. Fire trucks screeched in, hoses blasting, but Jalen stood frozen, the heat at his back, their laughter in his ears, knowing this war was far from won. Hey, can you believe Jalen took on 3 thugs and still walked out? Comment number 1 if you're amazed he fought back despite the odds, or number 2 if you think those cops are pure evil for letting it happen. If this raw injustice gets your blood boiling, smash that like button to stand with Jalen. And if you're hooked on his unbreakable spirit, subscribe now, hit that bell, and don't miss a second of this wild ride. Hargrove and Pike just torched his room, but Jalen's still breathing. How's he gonna dodge their next hit with nowhere left to run? Drop your predictions below, because this fire's only the start. Jalen Carter stumbled through the smoky haze outside the burning motel, the roar of flames and the wail of sirens clawing at his ears. His shirt hung in tatters, coffee-stained and singed, his blistered chest throbbing with every ragged breath. Blood crusted his swollen eye and his ribs ached from the jail cell beating. But he clutched his laptop bag like a lifeline, the crumpled note, "Next time you burn," still gripped in his fist. Across the parking lot, Hargrove and Pike lounged against their patrol car, their grins glinting in the firelight, untouchable as the chaos unfolded. Jalen's legs trembled, exhaustion sinking deep, but he couldn't stay. Nashville was a trap, and Seattle, his tech conference, his shot at Nexus, was slipping away. 3 days left, and he'd be damned if he let them bury him here. He scanned the lot, shadows shifting as motel guests milled in panic, fire hoses blasting the blaze. A semi-truck idled near the highway ramp, its driver, a grizzled woman with a buzz cut and a trucker cap, barking orders into a radio. Jalen limped toward her, his voice hoarse. "I need a ride. Anywhere north." She squinted at him, taking in his battered state, the bag slung over his shoulder. "You look like hell, kid. Trouble?" Jalen nodded, short and sharp. "Yeah, cops. I just need out." She chewed her lip, then jerked her thumb at the cab. "Hop in, I'm headed to Louisville. Keep your head down." Relief hit him like a wave, and he climbed in, sinking into the worn leather seat, the engine's rumble vibrating through his bones. The trucker, who grunted her name as Ellie, peeled out, the motel shrinking in the side mirror, flames licking the night sky. Jalen leaned back, his bag on his lap, the note stuffed in his pocket. "Thanks," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Ellie shrugged, her eyes on the road. "Seen too many folks running from badges. You ain't the first." The highway stretched, dark and empty, headlights slicing through the humid Tennessee night, and Jalen let himself breathe, the adrenaline bleeding out. He'd escaped the fire, dodged Hargrove and Pike's latest hit. Ellie flicked on the radio, a scratchy country tune filling the cab, and Jalen closed his eyes, plotting his next move. Louisville was a start. Close enough to catch a Greyhound. To Seattle, he could still make it, still pitch Nexus, still win. 2 hours later, the truck rolled into a neon-lit truck stop on the Kentucky border, diesel fumes thick in the air. Ellie nodded toward a Greyhound station across the lot. "That's your ticket, stay sharp." Jalen handed her a crumpled 20 from his wallet, all he had left, and climbed down, his legs shaky but holding. "Appreciate it," he said, and she waved him off, already lighting a cigarette. He hobbled to the station, the night cool against his burns, and bought a ticket for the next bus to Seattle, leaving in 30 minutes. The clerk, a bored kid with acne scars, barely glanced at him, sliding the ticket over with a yawn. Jalen sank onto a plastic bench, the station's fluorescent buzz a harsh echo of the precinct cell. His bag rested on his knees, Nexus safe inside, and he let himself hope just for a moment that he'd outrun the storm. The bus rolled in, a battered silver beast with flickering headlights, and Jalen boarded, claiming a window seat near the back. The cabin smelled of stale chips and body odor, half full with weary travelers, a mom shushing a fussy toddler, an old man clutching a duffel. Jalen leaned against the glass, the engine's growl lulling him as they pulled onto the interstate. He'd made it, slipped Hargrove and Pike's grasp, kept his dream alive. The miles ticked by, Kentucky blurring into Indiana, the night swallowing the road, and Jalen's eyelids drooped, exhaustion pulling him under. He'd won this round, beaten the odds again. Seattle was close, so close. But an hour past Indianapolis, the bus jolted, tires screeching as it swerved to the shoulder. Jalen snapped awake, heart pounding, as red and blue lights flashed through the windows. A state trooper's cruiser blocked the lane, its sirens slicing, the quiet. Passengers stirred, grumbling, as the driver muttered into his radio. The trooper, a lean guy with a buzz cut and a flashlight, climbed aboard, his boots heavy on the steps. "Jalen Carter," he barked, scanning the rows, his beam landing on Jalen's face. "Step out, you're coming with me." Jalen's gut twisted, but he stood, slow and deliberate, his bag slung over his shoulder. "What's this about?" he asked, voice steady despite the dread clawing up his spine. The trooper smirked, hand on his holster. "Fugitive warrant, move." Passengers turned, eyes wide, whispers rippling. "He's dangerous," a guy in a ball cap hissed, loud enough to carry. "Knew he looked off," a woman in a hoodie muttered, clutching her purse. Jalen raised his hands, calm but firm. "I'm no fugitive. Check my record." The trooper grabbed his arm, yanking him into the aisle, and Jalen caught the glint of a radio call crackling on the guy's belt. Hargrove's voice, faint but unmistakable. "That's him. Bring him in." The pieces clicked, a setup wired from Nashville, and Jalen's blood ran cold. The trooper shoved him toward the door, but not before slipping a cold metal object into Jalen's bag, a pistol, its weight thudding against his laptop. "Found this," the trooper lied, loud for the passengers, his smirk widening. "Armed and dangerous, huh?" Jalen's mind raced, panic surging, but he'd been here before, framed and cornered. He twisted, grabbing the trooper's radio with a wrestler's speed, and mashed the transmit button, his voice booming through the static. "This is Jalen Carter, on a Greyhound to Seattle. This cop's planning a gun on me, working with Nashville PD. It's a setup, live for anyone listening." The trooper lunged, wrestling the radio back, but the damage was done. Passengers gasping, some filming. The old man in the duffel seat nodding like he'd seen it all. The trooper's face flushed, his grip faltering. "You're done," he snarled, but his voice shook, the bluff crumbling. Jalen stared him down, chest heaving. "Let me go, or this blows up bigger." The trooper hesitated, eyes darting to the phones aimed at him, then shoved Jalen back into his seat, muttering, "Stay put," before storming off, the cruiser peeling away. Jalen sank down, adrenaline crashing, his hands trembling as he clutched his bag. He'd outsmarted the bastard, turned the trap into a spotlight, kept his freedom. Passengers stared, some nodding, others glaring, but he'd won, kept Nexus alive. The bus rumbled back onto the road, the driver cursing under his breath, and Jalen let himself grin, a small, fierce thing. He'd beaten them again, dodged the bullet, literally this time. Seattle was still his, the conference still in reach. He leaned back, the gun's weight a cold reminder in his bag, but he'd handled it, turned their game against them. Then the bus lurched, a deafening crunch, splitting the night. Metal screamed as a pickup truck slammed into the side, its grill a battering ram, sending the Greyhound skidding off the road. Jalen gripped his seat, the world tilting, passengers screaming as the bus plunged down an embankment. Ice-cold water rushed in, the river swallowing the wreckage, and Jalen's victory drowned with it. His bag slipped from his grasp, sinking into the flood, and he kicked free, lungs burning, as the current dragged him under. Hargrove and Pike hadn't just sent a trooper, they'd sent a hit, and now he was fighting for his life in the dark, freezing depths. Jalen Carter thrashed in the icy grip of the river, the bus's wreckage sinking fast around him. Freezing water flooded his lungs, his blistered chest screaming as he kicked against the current, the weight of his soaked clothes dragging him down. The Greyhound's twisted frame groaned, bubbles erupting as it plunged deeper, passengers' screams fading into muffled cries. His laptop bag was gone, swallowed by the black depths, but survival trumped everything now. He clawed upward, lungs burning, and broke the surface, gasping as the frigid air hit his face. Debris bobbed around him, a seat cushion, a shattered window frame, and then a small, terrified sob cut through the chaos. A kid, no older than 8, flailed nearby, his tiny hands clutching a backpack, eyes wide with panic. Jalen swam toward him, every stroke a knife through his bruised ribs, the cold numbing his fingers. "Hold on," he yelled, voice raw, and grabbed the boy's arm, pulling him close. The kid clung to him, shivering, his teeth chattering as Jalen hooked an arm around a floating chunk of metal, keeping them afloat. The river roared, tugging them downstream, but Jalen scanned the bank, spotting flashing lights, paramedics scrambling down the muddy slope. "Over here," he shouted, waving his free hand, and a rescuer tossed a rope, the coil splashing beside them. Jalen looped it under the kid's arms, then his own, and held tight as they were hauled to shore, the boy's small body trembling against his chest. Paramedics swarmed them, wrapping Jalen and the kid in foil blankets, the crinkle loud against the siren's wail. Jalen coughed up water, his throat raw, his swollen eye throbbing as he sank onto the muddy bank. The kid's mom rushed over, sobbing, pulling her son into her arms, and she grabbed Jalen's hand, tears streaking her face. "Thank you," she choked out, her voice breaking. "You saved him." Jalen nodded, too winded to speak, his gaze drifting to the river where survivors staggered out, some still filming with shaky hands. His heroism was caught on a passenger's phone, the clip already looping in his mind, a flicker of hope amid the wreckage. He'd lost Nexus, his bag, his pitch, but he'd kept this kid alive, kept himself alive. Paramedics lifted him onto a stretcher, the cold blanket crackling, and rolled him toward an ambulance, the hospital a blurry promise of safety. The ER at St. Mary's in Evansville was a blur of white coats and beeping machines, the antiseptic sting sharp in Jalen's nose. Nurses cut away his ruined shirt, revealing a patchwork of burns, bruises, and cuts, his skin a map of the hell he'd endured. They hooked him to an IV, the drip slow and cold, and patched his ribs, murmuring about cracked bones. Jalen lay still, the stretcher's thin mattress creaking under him, his mind replaying the crash, the truck's grill, Hargrove's voice on that radio. He'd survived, beaten the river, saved a life. The hospital buzzed around him, a TV in the corner flickering, with news of the wreck, his face flashing in grainy phone footage. He let himself relax just for a moment, thinking he'd found a haven, a chance to regroup. But the door banged open, and Detective Hargrove stormed in, his buzz cut glinting under the fluorescent lights, his scowl deeper than ever. 2 uniformed cops flanked him, their hands on their holsters, and Jalen's stomach dropped. "Jalen Carter," Hargrove barked, slapping a warrant on the bedside table. "You're under arrest. Vehicular manslaughter, reckless endangerment. That bus crash? Your fault." Jalen bolted upright, the IV tugging at his arm, pain shooting through his ribs. "What?" I didn't crash anything, a truck hit us. Hargrove smirked, leaning close, his breath sour with coffee. Witnesses say you fought the driver, caused the swerve. 15 dead, Carter. You're done. Jalen's head spun. The lie, so blatant it choked him. That's insane. I saved a kid. Check the videos. The nurses froze, their hands hovering over bandages, and one, a thin woman with a pinched face, muttered under her breath. Typical. Another, a guy with a buzz cut, whispered, should have stayed off that bus, loud enough for Jalen to hear. Hargrove nodded at them, like they'd confirmed his story, and the cop stepped forward, cuffing Jalen's wrists to the bed rails, the metal cold against his raw skin. You're not going anywhere, Hargrove said, his voice a low growl. Seattle's off the table. Jalen yanked against the cuffs, his burns flaring, but the steel held, biting deeper. The nurses turned away, their murmurs turning to slurs. Troublemaker. Thug, as they slowed his IV drip to a trickle, leaving his pain untreated. Jalen's chest heaved, rage and helplessness warring inside him, but he clung to the footage, the truth out there on those phones. Hours dragged, the hospital room a prison of beeping monitors and Hargrove's lingering stench, when Denise Brooks burst in, her Navy suit wrinkled, her briefcase banging against her hip. What the hell is this? She snapped, glaring at Hargrove. You've got no case. She shoved her phone at him, a hacked hospital camera feed playing live, showing Jalen limp on the stretcher. No fight, no crash, just a battered man. This went viral an hour ago, plus passenger clips from the bus, the river. You're framing him, and it's on tape. Hargrove's smirk faltered, his thick fingers snatching the phone, but the footage rolled, undeniable. Denise didn't. Stop. I've got a judge on the line. Release him or your badge is toast. The air thickened, Hargrove's scowl twisting as he scrolled the screen, the cops behind him shifting uneasily. This is bullshit, he muttered. But his voice cracked, the bluff crumbling. Denise crossed her arms, her stare unrelenting. Uncuff him. Now. Hargrove tossed the phone back, grumbling. Cut him loose. And the cops fumbled with the cuffs, their hands shaky. Jalen rubbed his wrists, relief flooding him, the IV dripping faster now as a nurse reluctantly adjusted it. He'd beaten. The lie kept his freedom, his shot at Seattle flickering back to life. Denise helped him sit up, her grip firm. You're a damn survivor, she said, low and fierce. Let's get you out. He limped out, leaning on her, the hospital's sterile halls stretching endless, victory bitter in his bruised mouth. He'd outsmarted Hargrove again, turned their frame up into dust. The exit doors slid open, the night air cool against his cuts, and Jalen straightened, ready to claw his way back to Nexus. But as they stepped into the parking lot, a sharp crack split the silence. A sniper's bullet grazed his arm, blood blooming hot and fast, the hospital window behind him shattering in a spray of glass. Jalen dove behind a car, Denise ducking with him, her scream muffled as tires screeched nearby. Pike's voice crackled, over a radio in the distance, cold and clear. Finish him. Jalen pressed his hand to the wound, blood seeping through his fingers, his heart pounding. The hospital wasn't safe. Nowhere was, and Hargrove's crew had upped the game to murder. Jalen Carter crouched behind a rusted sedan in the hospital parking lot, blood oozing from the sniper's graze on his arm, the sting sharp against the cool Indiana night. Glass crunched under his knees, the shattered hospital window glinting in the moonlight, and his chest heaved, ribs aching from the river crash. Denise Brooks huddled beside him, her Navy suit streaked with dirt, her breath fast and shallow as Pike's voice faded from the distant radio. Finish him. Jalen pressed his torn sleeve to the wound, his mind racing. Hargrove and Pike weren't just framing him anymore. They'd gone for the kill, and the hospital was a kill zone. He scanned the shadows, headlights flashing as an ambulance roared, passed and spotted a narrow alley cutting through the lot. Move, he hissed, grabbing Denise's arm, and they bolted, his battered legs screaming with every step. They stumbled into the alley, a maze of overflowing dumpsters and flickering streetlights, the air thick with rot and gasoline. Jalen's arm throbbed, blood soaking his hand, but he pushed forward, Denise's heels clacking behind him. A figure stepped from the gloom, a black woman in a leather jacket, her dreads pulled tight, her eyes sharp under a knit cap. "Carter," she said, voice low and urgent. Jalen froze, hand raised, but she waved them closer. "Maya, I've been tracking you since Nashville. Come with me." Denise hesitated, but Jalen nodded, instinct kicking in. "No choice," he muttered, and followed Maya as she led them to a dented van parked behind a chain-link fence. They piled in, the engine sputtering to life, and Maya peeled out, tires squealing as they vanished into the night. The safe house was a cramped basement in a rundown Evansville neighborhood, the walls lined with peeling paint and stacks of laptops. Jalen sank onto a sagging couch, his arm dripping blood onto the cracked leather, his burns and bruises a pulsing agony. Maya tossed him a first aid kit, her movements quick and sure. "You're a damn ghost out there," she said, kneeling to wrap his arm in gauze. "Hargrove's crew's been on my radar for years. Racist pigs with a body count." Jalen winced as she tightened the bandage, his voice rough. "They've been after me since Atlanta." "Why me?" Maya's eyes flicked up, hard and knowing. "You're a threat. Black man with a big idea. They don't like that." She stood, pulling a tablet from a cluttered table, and tapped the screen. "Your app, Nexus. I dug into it. Worth hundreds of millions if it launches." Jalen's jaw tightened, the stakes sinking deeper. He'd lost his laptop in the river, but Nexus lived in the cloud, his code, his dream, still breathing. Maya handed him the tablet, her fingers brushing his. "We can fight back. I've got a network, activists, hackers. We leak this, make you untouchable." Jalen nodded, slow and fierce, the plan sparking in his battered mind. They hooked the tablet to a burner laptop, Maya's hands flying over the keys as she breached his startup servers. "Investor docs, valuation reports, all here," she said, pulling files with a grin. "We blast this to the press, social media, everywhere." Jalen leaned in, dictating a statement, his voice steady despite the pain. "Jalen Carter, Nexus, founder, targeted by corrupt cops. This is my work, my fight." Maya hit send, the leak exploding online, headlines flaring within minutes. "Tech star hunted by rogue police." The response was instant, brutal, beautiful. Tech blogs buzzed, investors tweeted outrage. Hashtags like "Majors Save Jalen" trending as the story went viral. Jalen watched the screen, his bruised face flickering in the glow, a grim smile tugging his lips. Calls flooded police precincts, feds promising probes, and Hargrove's name splashed across every feed. Maya clapped his shoulder, her grin wide. "They can't touch you now. Too big to bury." Jalen exhaled, relief washing over him, the weight lifting for the first time in days. His arm ached, his ribs creaked, but he'd turned the tables, made Nexus a shield. Investors wired emergency funds, vowing to fly him to Seattle, and local cops backed off, their radios silent. He'd clawed his way out of the sniper's crosshairs, kept his dream alive. But as dawn crept through the basement's grimy window, a thud echoed upstairs, heavy and wrong. Jalen tensed, Maya's hand dropping to a pistol on her belt, her eyes narrowing. "Stay here," she whispered, creeping up the stairs. But Jalen followed, his battered body protesting every step. The front door hung splintered, the safe house breached, and a sight stopped him cold. Maya's body lay crumpled on the porch, her dreads splayed in a pool of blood, her throat slashed ear to ear. A note was pinned to her chest with a rusty knife, scrawled in jagged ink, "You're next." Jalen's knees buckled, his breath hitching, the air thick with copper and death. Hargrove's squad had found them, raided her network, turned his victory to ash. Footsteps crunched outside, shadows moving, and Jalen stumbled back, grabbing the tablet as sirens wailed in the distance, too late to save her. Can you feel Jalen's gut punch losing Maya after she saved him? Comment. Number 1, if you're raging at Hargrove's crew for this brutal hit, or number 2, if you think Jalen's fame might still protect him. If this relentless fight against injustice has you hooked, smash that like button to honor Maya's sacrifice. And if you're dying to see Jalen strike back, subscribe now, hit that bell, and join us for every heart-pounding twist. Maya turned Nexus into a weapon, but Hargrove's not done. What's Jalen gonna do with his ally gone and killers closing in? Drop your thoughts below because this war's about to explode. Jalen Carter stood in the dim basement of the Evansville safe house, the air thick with the stench of Maya's blood seeping through the floorboards above. His arm throbbed from the sniper's graze, bandaged tight, and his chest burned with every shallow breath, ribs bruised and blistered from days of hell. The tablet trembled in his hands, its screen still glowing with the viral leak of Nexus's worth. A lifeline now stained by her death. The note pinned to her corpse. Your next eye lay crumpled beside him, its jagged threat fueling a rage that drowned his pain. Hargrove and Pike had taken everything, his safety, his ally, but he wasn't running anymore. Seattle was 2 days away, the tech conference his last stand, and he'd make them pay, turn their hate into his weapon. He grabbed Maya's burner laptop, its edges chipped from her frantic hacking, and synced it to the tablet. Her files a goldmine of dirt on Hargrove's crew, years of surveillance, audio clips, photos of payoffs, all hers, now his. Sirens wailed closer, cops or feds, he couldn't tell, but he had no time to wait. He slung the laptop into a backpack Maya had left, his movements sharp despite the ache, and slipped out the back, the dawn light gray and cold. A cab idled 2 blocks away, its driver half asleep, and Jalen climbed in, barking, "Airport fast!" The guy nodded, peeling out, the safe house fading as Jalen's mind churned. He'd lost his pitch deck in the river, Maya in the raid, but Nexus lived online, and her evidence was a bomb he'd drop on the world. At the airport, he used investor cash wired overnight to book a private jet, the leak's fallout making him a name too big to ignore. The plane was small, a sleek Cessna, and Jalen boarded alone, sinking into a leather seat, the laptop open on his lap. The engines whined, lifting off, and he patched into the conference livestream, hijacking the feed with a borrowed earpiece. His bruised face filled screens in Seattle, 1,000 tech execs staring as he spoke, voice raw but steady. "I'm Jalen Carter, Nexus founder. For days, corrupt cops, Hargrove and Pike, have hunted me, framed me, killed my friend Maya to silence me. This is their work." He uploaded her files, audio of Hargrove's slurs, Pike's orders to finish him, photos of cash changing hands. The crowd roared, gasps and shouts erupting, phones flashing as the evidence hit social media like a tidal wave. The stream spiked, millions watching live, investors leaping to their feet, clapping, chanting his name. "Carter! Carter!" echoed, through the jet's speakers, a lifeline pulling him back from the edge. He leaned into the mic, his swollen eyes squinting against the cabin light. "Nexus launches today, free to the world, because they can't stop me. They tried to bury me. For being black, for daring to rise, this is my answer." He hit publish, the app going live, downloads soaring as the stock ticker climbed, hundreds of millions in valuation flashing on screen. Feds swarmed Hargrove's precinct back east, cuffs snapping on deputies, warrants issued, the leak's fallout unstoppable. Jalen sank back, a grim smile cracking his busted lip. He'd done it, turned Maya's death into a reckoning, kept Nexus alive. Seattle loomed below, his victory real, tangible, unbreakable. The jet landed smooth, taxiing to a private hangar, and Jalen stepped out, the conference team rushing him to a hotel downtown. Investors flanked him, vowing protection, their suits crisp against his torn shirt, his bloodied arm a badge of the fight. He checked into a suite, the skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows, and crashed onto the bed, the laptop beside him still humming with Nexus's triumph. His phone buzzed, alerts of arrests, Hargrove's mugshot plastered online, and Jalen let himself breathe deep and slow, the weight lifting. 2 days of hell and he'd won, flipped their game, made them pay. He closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him under, thinking it was over, the storm finally breaking. But at midnight, a blast shook the room, the windows shattering inward, glass raining like knives. Jalen rolled off the bed, heart slamming, as flames licked the walls, a bomb's roar deafening him. Smoke choked the air, his burns flaring as he crawled, coughing, toward the door. The hallway glowed orange, fire spreading fast, and a figure loomed through the haze. Pike, his wiry frame unmistakable, a pistol gleaming in his hand. "You don't get to win," he snarled, his patchy beard curling with a sneer, his eyes wild with hate. Jalen dove behind a dresser, glass crunching under him, his mind racing. The feds had Hargrove, but Pike was free, unhinged, striking back with everything he had left. Pike fired, bullets splintering the wood, and Jalen lunged, tackling him low, wrestler's instincts kicking in. They crashed to the floor, the gun skidding across the carpet, and Jalen drove his fist into Pike's jaw, bone crunching under his knuckles. Pike clawed back, nails raking Jalen's arm, but Jalen pinned him, slamming his head against the tile until his eyes rolled back, body limp. Jalen staggered up, chest heaving, blood dripping from his reopened graze, the fire roaring closer. He grabbed the laptop, kicking the door open, and stumbled into the hall, smoke stinging his eyes. Sprinklers hissed, water soaking him, but Hargrove's voice boomed from outside, a megaphone cutting through the chaos. "This ends now." Jalen froze, the realization hitting hard. Pike wasn't alone. Hargrove was loose and the war wasn't over. Jalen Carter stumbled through the smoke-filled hallway of the Seattle hotel, the sprinklers drenching his torn shirt, blood seeping from the reopened graze on his arm. Flames crackled behind him, the bomb Pike had detonated still roaring through. The sweat, and his ribs throbbed with every step, bruised and battered from days of relentless attacks. Pike lay unconscious on the tile, his pistol lost in the chaos, but Hargrove's voice boomed outside, a megaphone's harsh echo cutting through the haze. "This ends now." Jalen clutched Maya's laptop, its chipped edges digging into his palm, the only piece of nexus he had left. The feds had Hargrove cuffed, or so he'd thought, but this was no bluff. They'd broken free, turned his triumph into a war zone, and he was trapped, the conference one day away, his dream dangling by a thread. He ducked into a stairwell, the air cooler but thick with the stench of burning carpet, and limped down, his soaked shoes slipping on the steps. The lobby glowed red through the glass doors below, squad cars flashing, but these weren't feds. A dozen figures in black tactical gear swarmed the entrance, rifles raised, Hargrove's rogue unit sealing the building tight. Jalen's stomach knotted, his mind racing. Power flickered, lights dying with a pop, plunging the stairwell into shadow, and he heard boots pounding up from below, radios crackling with Pike's voice groggy but alive. "Top floor, he's there." Jalen backtracked, heart slamming, and slipped into the 10th floor. The hall silent but for the distant wail of sirens. He needed a plan, a way to fight, not just run. The floor was a maze of locked rooms and flickering exit signs, and Jalen darted to a utility closet, its door ajar, a janitor's cart tipped inside. He rummaged through, hands shaking, and grabbed a coil of extension cord, a mop handle, and a bottle of bleach, his tech brain wiring a trap. He rigged the cord across the hall, ankle high, and soaked it with bleach, the fumes stinging his eyes. The mop handle he wedged into a fire extinguisher's nozzle, a makeshift spear, and crouched behind a vending machine, the laptop tucked under his arm. Boots thumped closer, 3 goons in black bursting through the stairwell door, rifles sweeping. "Carter," one barked, his voice muffled by a mask. "No point hiding." Jalen held his breath, waiting as they hit the cord, the bleach slick, floor sending the lead guy sprawling, his rifle clattering. Jalen sprang, swinging the extinguisher, foam blasting the second's face, blinding him. The third fired, bullets chewing the wall, but Jalen drove the mop handle into his knee, cracking. Bone. The guy howled, dropping, and Jalen wrestled his rifle free, slamming the butt into his skull. The first thug scrambled up, lunging, but Jalen sidestepped, using the cord to trip him again, then cracked his head against the vending machine. Glass, shattering as he went limp. Blood pooled on the tile, Jalen's hands slick with it, his chest heaving. 3 down, but the building hummed with more, Hargrove's voice outside a constant growl. "Flush him out!" Jalen grabbed the rifle, its weight foreign but steadying, and moved, the hall a gauntlet of smoke and flickering lights. He reached a conference room, its windows blown out, Seattle's skyline glittering beyond, and barricaded the door with a table, chairs stacked high. The laptop sat on a podium, still humming, and he patched into a hotel security feed, grainy images flickering of Hargrove barking orders, Pike limping beside him, a dozen more goons spreading out. Jalen's arm bled through the gauze, his burns screaming, but he'd held them off, turned their siege into a brawl. Sirens wailed louder, feds closing in, their choppers buzzing overhead, and Jalen let himself hope, just for a second. Hargrove's crew was scattering, radio chatter panicked, and he'd survived the worst. Kept Nexus alive. But as chopper lights swept the building, a TV in the corner flared to life, a fake news report cutting through the static. Breaking: Jalen Carter, tech founder, now a cop-killing terrorist. Suspect in Nashville bombing, Seattle hotel blast. Jalen froze, the rifle slipping in his grip, his bruised face staring back from the screen, a mugshot twisted into a lie. The anchor droned. Authorities say he's armed, dangerous, responsible for multiple deaths. Jalen's gut twisted, Hargrove's voice echoing in his mind. They'd flipped the script, smeared him nationwide, turned his stand into a death sentence. The city's pulse shifted, distant shouts rising, and Jalen peeked through the shattered window, spotting mobs forming below, chanting slurs. "Get him! Thug!" echoing up the glass. The barricade rattled, boots pounding the door, and Jalen braced, rifle raised, his back to the wall. The wood splintered, SWAT bursting in, not feds but locals, duped by the broadcast, their shields up, guns blazing. "Drop it," the lead barked, his voice a snarl, and Jalen tossed the rifle, hands high, knowing resistance was suicide. Bullets whizzed past, grazing his shoulder, and he dove behind the podium, glass crunching under him. "I'm not armed," he yelled, voice hoarse. But they advanced, boots stomping, a taser's prongs biting his side. Electricity ripped through him, his muscles seizing, and he collapsed face down, the laptop skidding across the floor. They cuffed him, wrists raw, and dragged him up, their glares cold through visors, slurs slipping under their breath. Killer, trash. Jalen's vision swam, blood dripping from his shoulder, the room a blur of black gear and flashing lights. The SWAT leader radioed, "Suspect down," and hauled him toward the stairwell, the mob's roar growing outside. He'd beaten Hargrove's goons, held the line, but this was bigger. A city turned against him, the lie swallowing his truth. His legacy, Nexus, his fight, trashed in a heartbeat by a broadcast engineered to kill. They shoved him down the steps, his knees buckling, and the lobby loomed, red and blue lights pulsing through the glass. Hargrove stood beyond, megaphone down, a smirk curling his buzz-cut shadow, untouchable as the feds circled too late. Jalen's head hung, his body broken, cornered by a world that saw only the smear, not the man. Jalen Carter lay sprawled on the cold tile of the hotel lobby, his wrists cuffed tight behind his back, the SWAT team's boots scuffing the floor around him. Blood trickled from the fresh graze on his shoulder, mixing with the sweat and soot, streaking his torn shirt, his blistered chest heaving with shallow, pained breaths. The fake news report still echoed in his ears, branding him a cop-killing terrorist, a lie that had turned Seattle against him in hours. His swollen eye throbbed, half shut, and his ribs screamed from the taser's jolt. But he clung to the fight, the truth still out there in Maya's files, in the Nexus launch. The lobby pulsed with red and blue lights, feds clashing with the mob outside, their chants, "Murderer! Thug!" A wall of hate crashing through the glass doors. Hargrove's smirk loomed beyond, a shadow of victory, and Jalen's gut twisted, knowing he'd been cornered, his legacy trashed. The SWAT leader, a hulking figure with a buzz cut, yanked Jalen up by the cuffs, his grip bruising through the gauze on Jalen's arm. "Move!" he barked, shoving him toward a side exit, the team flanking tight, rifles raised. Jalen stumbled, his legs shaky, but he kept his head up, scanning the chaos. Phones flashed through the windows, the mob filming, their slurs a venomous chorus. He'd beaten Hargrove's goons, held the hotel, but this was a new beast, a city deceived, a system weaponized against him. The SWAT radio crackled on the leader's belt, static cutting through the noise, and Jalen seized it, wrenching the device free with a wrestler's twist. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he mashed the button, voice hoarse and fierce. "This is Jalen Carter, I'm no terrorist. Check the conference feed, Maya's files, the The hospital tapes. It's all there. Live now. The leader lunged, slamming Jalen against the wall, the radio clattering, but the broadcast hit the airwaves raw and unfiltered. Feds outside froze, heads cocking to their own radios, and the mob's roar faltered, some lowering their phones, eyes flickering with doubt. Jalen's chest heaved, blood dripping down his chin. But he'd planted the seed, cracked the lie. The SWAT leader snarled, "Shut it!" and cracked his baton against Jalen's knee, pain exploding as he crumpled, gasping. But the team hesitated, their visors glinting as radios buzzed with chatter, feds confirming the feed. "Stand down," a voice crackled, sharp and federal, and the leader's scowl deepened, his baton hovering then dropping. They uncuffed Jalen, slow and grudging, their glares cold but faltering. Jalen staggered up, leaning on a shattered counter, his body a wreck but his mind racing. The mob thinned, some drifting away, others muttering, the tide shifting as the truth bled through. Feds stormed the lobby, badges flashing, and Hargrove's smirk vanished outside, his buzz-cut silhouette bolting as cuffs snapped on his wrists. Live on every feed. Jalen's knees buckled, relief crashing over him, and he sank to the floor, the laptop lost but Nexus alive in the cloud, its launch still soaring. He'd cleared his name, turned the broadcast back on them, kept his dream breathing. Paramedics rushed in, their kits clanging, and lifted him onto a stretcher, the cool foil blanket crinkling over his burns. He closed his eyes, the fight draining. Out, thinking it was over, the breaking point passed. But as the stretcher rolled through the lobby, a new horror flickered on a wall-mounted TV, the volume low but piercing. Pike's face filled the screen, his wiry frame hunched in a dark warehouse, a live stream glowing from a shaky camera. Jalen's sister, Keisha, sat bound to a chair, her braids tangled, her eyes wide with terror, duct tape over her mouth. Pike paced behind her, a blade glinting in his hand, his voice a rasp. "You took everything, Carter. Now I take her." He pressed the knife to her throat, a thin line of blood welling, and Jalen jolted upright, the stretcher rocking, his scream. No." Paramedics grabbed him, pinning his arms, but he thrashed, his burns tearing open, blood soaking the blanket. The feds spun, radios erupting, but Pike's stream cut deeper, his sneer twisting. "You've got 1 hour, Carter. Find her or she's gone." The feed blinked out, static hissing, and Jalen's world narrowed. Keisha's face burned into his skull. She was 26, a nurse, his rock, the one who'd pushed him to code Nexus when he doubted himself. Hargrove was cuffed, but Pike was free, a loyal deputy springing him, and this was his endgame, personal, savage. Jalen tore free of the paramedics, staggering to his feet, his shoulder bleeding, his knee buckling, but he didn't care. "Where's he at?" he roared, grabbing a Fed's arm, voice cracking. The agent, a wiry guy with glasses, fumbled his radio. "We're tracing it." "Hang on." Jalen didn't hang on. He snatched a dropped SWAT pistol from the floor, its weight cold in his hand, and bolted for the exit, the feds shouting behind him. The night hit him, Seattle's air sharp and wet, the mob's remnants scattering as he ran, his limp slowing him but not stopping him. He flagged a cab, the driver's eyes widening at his bloodied state, and barked, "Downtown, warehouses now!" The car screeched off, tires smoking, and Jalen leaned forward, gun on his lap. The laptop gone, but Maya's voice in his head, urging him on. He'd cleared his name, beaten the siege, but Pike had Keisha, and every second ticked like a bomb. The cab raced through the city, neon blurring past, and Jalen's fist clenched, his burns pulsing, knowing this was it, the real breaking point. Not the hotel, not the mob, but her. He slammed cash on the seat as the cab skidded into an industrial sprawl, rusted warehouses looming under sodium lights. Jalen stumbled out, gun raised, his breath fogging in the chill, and scanned the shadows, Pike's deadline ticking down. A faint scream cut the silence, Keisha's voice muffled but hers, and Jalen ran toward it, his knee buckling, blood trailing behind him. He crashed through a barricade, wooden crates splintering, and spotted the warehouse, its windows dark but a faint glow seeping from a crack. Pike was in there, Keisha was in there, and Jalen's fight wasn't over. Not until she was safe. Not until he ended this. Jalen Carter burst into the rusted warehouse, the Seattle night clinging to his soaked, bloodied shirt. the SWAT pistol trembling in his grip. His shoulder bled freely, the graze reopened, and his blistered chest heaved, ribs cracking with every ragged breath. Keisha's muffled scream echoed through the cavernous space, guiding him past stacks of rotting crates and flickering fluorescent tubes. Pike's deadline ticked in his skull, minutes left, and Jalen's knee buckled under him, but he pushed forward, the gun's cold steel grounding him. The warehouse stank of oil and mold, shadows twisting in the dim glow, and he spotted her, tied to a metal chair in the center, her braids tangled, blood trickling from a shallow cut on her neck. Pike paced behind her, his wiry frame coiled, a jagged knife glinting as he muttered into a live-stream camera propped on a tripod. Jalen ducked behind a crate, his pulse hammering, and scanned the setup. Tripwires stretched across the floor, thin glints of wire rigged to cans of gasoline, a death trap waiting to blow. Pike's voice rasped, low and venomous. "Time's up, Carter. You took Hargrove. Now I take her." He pressed the blade harder, Keisha whimpering through the duct tape, and Jalen's gut clenched, rage drowning his pain. He'd lost Maya, lost Nexus's physical core, but Keisha was his line, unbreakable. He edged closer, silent despite his limp, and timed Pike's pacing, waiting for the bastard to turn. The live stream glowed, thousands watching, and Jalen knew this was it. Live or die, no feds to save him now. Pike spun, his patchy beard curling with a sneer, and Jalen lunged, ducking a tripwire as he tackled low, slamming Pike into the concrete. The knife skidded, clattering against a crate, and Jalen drove his elbow into Pike's throat, a choked gurgle escaping as they rolled. Pike clawed back, nails raking Jalen's burns, but Jalen pinned his arm, twisting until a snap cracked through the air, Pike's wrist buckling. "You're done," Jalen snarled, slamming his head against the floor, blood smearing from Pike's nose. Pike thrashed, weaker now, and Jalen grabbed the knife, cutting Keisha's ropes, her sobs breaking, free as the tape peeled off. "Go!" he yelled, shoving her toward the door, but she grabbed his arm, shaking. "Not without you!" The warehouse trembled, sirens wailing close, and Jalen hauled Pike up, the gun jammed against his temple as cops stormed in. Feds this time, their vests stark against the gloom. "Drop it!" one barked, but Jalen held firm, his voice raw. "He's yours. Take him." They cuffed Pike, his broken arm dangling, his eyes wild with hate as they dragged him out, the live stream cutting to static. Jalen sank to his knees, Keisha clinging to him, her tears soaking his shoulder, and he hugged her tight, the fight bleeding out. Cops swarmed, securing the scene, and Jalen let the gun fall, his body a wreck but whole. Keisha safe, Pike gone. The feds nodded, one muttering, "You're clear," and Jalen exhaled, the nightmare ending, justice clawing through the chaos. They stumbled outside, the Seattle dawn breaking gray and cold, the warehouse's silhouette stark against the skyline. Paramedics rushed Keisha to an ambulance, her neck bandaged, her eyes locked on Jalen as he limped beside her, foil blanket crinkling over his burns. A Fed approached, a wiry guy with glasses, his badge glinting. "Carter, we've got Hargrove. Pike's crew, all of them, but there's more." Jalen frowned, his swollen eyes squinting, and the Fed lowered his voice, handing him a tablet. "We traced the cache, the hits. It's not just cops." The screen flared, a news clip rolling, and Jalen's blood froze. Victor Grayson, a white, billionaire tech titan, smirked from a podium, his silver hair gleaming, his voice smooth. "Nexus is a game changer. Shame its founder couldn't handle the pressure." Jalen's jaw dropped, the pieces slamming into place. Grayson, a rival he'd pitched 2 years ago, rejected for lacking vision, had orchestrated it all. The Fed's voice cut through, grim. He funded Hargrove, Pike, the whole damn thing. Wanted Nexus for himself, used racism as the spark. Untouchable so far. Jalen's fist clenched, the tablet trembling, his burns pulsing as the truth sank in. Sarah's call, the arrests, Maya's death, Keisha's blood. All pawns in Grayson's game, a corporate hit masked as hate. He'd fought the street, the system, thinking he'd won. But this was the real enemy, a shadow pulling strings from a penthouse beyond the law's reach. Keisha squeezed his hand, her voice soft, but fierce. "We fight on." Jalen met her eyes, her strength mirroring his, and nodded, slow and resolute. Nexus soared online, millions using it, his name cleared, but Grayson sat smug, untouchable, a new war brewing. Jalen straightened, ignoring the paramedics' protests, and limped to the ambulance, his mind already coding a counterstrike. He'd saved Keisha, broken Pike, exposed the cops, but Grayson was the root, the billionaire who'd turned his skin into a weapon against him. The feds watched, silent, as Jalen climbed in beside Keisha, the tablet clutched tight, a vow forming in his bruised throat. This wasn't the end. It was the start, and he'd bring Grayson down, whatever it took. The ambulance doors shut, the siren wailing as they sped off, Seattle's dawn swallowing the warehouse's glow. Jalen's body ached, blood crusted his arm, but his eyes burned, fixed on a future where Grayson paid. Nexus wasn't just an app now, it was a movement, a shield, and he'd wield it like a blade. Keisha leaned against him, her breath steadying, and he whispered, "We're not done." She nodded, a faint smile breaking through her tears, and the screen faded, the city rolling past. A battle won, but a war ignited. Jalen's fight far from over. Jalen Carter's harrowing journey in this story reveals profound truths about resilience, systemic bias, and the fight for justice. First, it shows that strength isn't just physical. It's the will to push forward when every odd stacks against you. Jalen faced relentless racial profiling, from Sarah's initial suspicion to Hargrove and Pike's brutal vendetta. Yet he never broke, using his intellect and grit to outsmart his foes. This teaches us that courage can turn victims into victors, even when the world sees you as a threat. Second, the tale exposes how racism isn't always loud. It's woven into quiet assumptions, corrupt systems, and unchecked power, escalating. From a flight attendant's call to a billionaire's conspiracy, it's a stark reminder to question what we accept as normal. Third, Jalen's bond with Keisha and Maya underscores the power of community. Those who stand with you can lift you up even when they're taken away. Finally, the twist with Victor Grayson reveals that injustice often hides behind wealth and privilege, a call to dig deeper than the surface villains. This story isn't just Jalen's, it's a mirror for us all. It asks us to confront our biases, fight for what's right, and never stop seeking truth no matter the cost. So what hit you hardest about Jalen's battle? Comment below with your takeaway. Did his resilience shock you, or did Grayson's shadow pull the rug out? If this tale of beating the odds fired you up, hit that like button, subscribe for more raw truths, and share it to spark the convo. Thanks for riding this wild journey with us. Here's to standing tall against the storm and building a world where justice isn't just a dream,